Wie geht's? Kultur in Zeiten des Coronavirus. Hello everyone to this special edition of Wie geht's, a podcast of conversations with people working in the arts, cultural policy and the creative sector, reflecting on how the coronavirus crisis affects the cultural sphere. I am Martin Zierold, Director of the Institute for Arts and Media Management at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Hamburg, Germany, which is producing this podcast. I'm talking in English today because we have our first international guest joining in our conversation. In this 10th edition of Wie geht's, I will talk to Beth Ponte, an arts manager and researcher based in Salvador in Brazil. Even though the corona crisis increasingly is a global crisis, and the virus has shown to everyone how interconnected the world we live in, the public conversations in Germany very strongly stay within national boundaries. Throughout our next editions of this podcast, we will try to include international perspectives. Brazil is a particularly interesting but also a potentially scary case, as the arts have been under threat under the Bolsonaro government even before the virus interrupted public life in Brazil. Beth Ponte will be able to give us insights into the specifics of the Brazilian situation, but she also has an international outlook and will share thoughts on the challenges arts managers face all over the world and which skills and competencies are needed to deal with and overcome the current crisis. The title of this podcast, Wie geht's, has a double meaning. It translates simply as, how are you? We want to know how people in the arts are doing during these extraordinary and challenging times. Yet, Wie geht's also means, how does it work? On this podcast, we hope to share fresh ideas, learnings, stories on how we learn to rethink our practices and our role for society as we try to come to grips with this crisis. My guest today, Beth Ponte, is a Brazilian arts manager, researcher, and independent consultant. She is the author and curator of the online platform Quality for Culture and a member of the board of the Brazilian Association of Social Organizations for Culture. Before moving back to Brazil earlier this year, she spent 1 year as a German Chancellor Fellow of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. And during that time, she was a guest researcher at the Institute of Arts and Media Management in Hamburg and a dear colleague of mine. Before that, she had been the institutional director of the NeoGiba program, the Centers for Youth and Children's Orchestras of the state of Bahia in Brazil for more than 8 years. Hi Beth, it's great that you found time to talk to me here in Hamburg to speak about the situation in Brazil regarding the coronavirus and the arts scene. The first question in this podcast, as you know, is always very brief, and I'm going to ask it in German. I know you understand German perfectly well, but you're welcome to answer in English. Wie geht's?
Hi, Martin. So, mir geht es good, but actually, given the current circumstances, well, I can say that personally, I'm fine, but I'm deeply concerned, as a lot of Brazilians, with the situation in the country and in the cultural sector right now.
Yeah, I guess that maybe some listeners are not completely familiar with the situation in Brazil politically, even before the coronavirus. So maybe it's good to talk about that in a second to give our listeners an overview. But just to start, what's the situation in public life right now? Are you on a lockdown like we are in Germany? At what point of the pandemic is Brazil at this point, and how is the government handling it?
I'm basically in a lockdown, but officially not. But all the capitals in Brazil, all the 26 capitals, beginning from yesterday, they have claimed to the citizens to stay at home if possible. And since last week, all the cities have canceled the cultural events, concerts, and etc. But as you said, the problems in the Brazilian cultural sector, and they were already pretty serious long before the coronavirus.
Yeah. So maybe it's good to highlight the basic challenges you're facing even before Corona. I guess it's connected to one name. It's not Donald Trump in your case, but the President Bolsonaro. Maybe if you can just give us a brief insight into the situation for the arts scene in Brazil before Corona hit.
Yes, and for the whole country now, the situation is pretty tense because as I think the world media is already covering, and the President Bolsonaro and his teams, they are fulfilling this position of enemies of science and knowledge. He gave a statement last night, basically contradicting all the recommendations of the World Health Organization and claiming the citizens to go back to normal life. And he's now in a war with the governors and the mayors of the cities in Brazil, who luckily they have autonomy not to say no to his recommendations. And of course, this climate, it affects heavily the cultural sector, and because long before the Bolsonaro, we were already not in a good position because he was already a openly against the cultural sector, the creative economy, the artists. We are facing the shutdown of the Ministry of Culture since January 2019, and many episodes of censorship, a cut in public funding, and now this coronavirus crisis. So the picture, unfortunately, is not good.
If you can maybe give an example of a specific institution, so the right to call for them to close doesn't lie with the government or the president, but it lies with the federal governments. So even if the president now says, go back to work, that won't mean that the arts institutions should reopen or will reopen.
Yes, and this we're going to see. Because in Brazil, well, luckily that this is a blessing and a curse, but the large majority of arts institutions, that they are public funded, but most of them, they are funded and run by the states and the cities. So we don't know yet what's going to happen with the federal museums and art centers, and they're not so numerous, but there are a few important museums, especially in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. And after this statement from last night, we don't know yet if those institutions are being asked not to go back to their activities. But in the other capitals, in the whole country, all the other institutions, that they are closed for a week at least.
So in a way, institutions that were with their backs against the wall already before this health crisis now face the extra challenge in a very obviously messed up situation. If I were to put the German situation very briefly, I think what we're seeing in Germany is that many organizations are actually very strong. And there was even a moment of enthusiasm, you could even say, in some institutions, seeing this current moment as a chance to really foster digital transformation, go online with projects, present their work online. So it is a crisis here, but at the same time, there's a lot of things happening. Also trying out projects that maybe should have been done anyway, and now they're accelerated in a way through the current moment. Do you see this kind of optimism happening, or I guess it must be much more dangerous in a way for the arts scene in Brazil right now?
Of course, we have some, also here in Brazil, some examples of arts institutions, of cultural organizations that are already well managed and organized and big enough to take some, I wouldn't say advantage, but they are really using this as a opportunity to boost their digital strategy. I could mention the Symphony Orchestra of São Paulo, that they have run for a few years the digital concert hall, just like the Berlin Philharmonic. Also the Youth Orchestra of Bahia, in which I worked for 8 years, that they are heavily using some digital tools not to make rehearsals and classes online, that they didn't stop their at their musical activities. And of course, we can see some other examples of like some music festivals online, and they are happening in the whole country. But I would say that those are isolated cases, and they don't really, they don't mirror the gravity of the situation the whole sector is going to face and is already facing.
Yeah. So if you were to give a prediction for the time beyond this very current moment of institutions really shutting their doors, how do you see this affecting the culture sector in Brazil over the course of the next months and years?
Well, I think it is in general, not only in the Brazilian situation, but for the cultural sector in the world as a whole. I would say that it is quite soon to think about takeaways because it has just started. But of course, this is a chance for us to reflect upon some practice and to give another value to some things. For instance, the data and the importance of data. We have seen that in the countries in the regions where the data and the knowledge about the size and the importance, the economic impact of the cultural field were already collected, they are giving faster and better responses to this crisis. And here in Brazil, I hope that in the future, the sector realizes the importance of advocacy, of solidarity among the field. I've been working in at least two initiatives of different groups. They are working on advocacy, not to ask at the mayor of Salvador and also the government of the state of Bahia. At those groups, now they are trying to ask for some measures, and also the observatory of creative economy in Bahia, that they are making a survey to try to understand the impacts of this crisis. So at least I think that in the future, this solidarity and this unity we are having now, we don't lose it.
Yeah, maybe before we take a look at the challenges the institutions are facing, not just in Brazil, but in a way worldwide, and you're an observer of the art scene globally with the project you did, so we refer to that in a second. But one question regarding the Brazilian situation specifically. In Germany, probably the group most fearful right now and most under pressure in a way, especially economically, are freelance artists and freelance people working in the arts field, self-employed entrepreneurs, because they lose their income from one day to the other. And the government now, in a way, is trying to put together budgets, supporting them, trying to bridge the time until they can do their work again. What's the situation like for people working outside organizations in Brazil? Do you have similar situations? I guess it might be even worse than in Germany.
Yes, it's going to be pretty worse. And bad news are that so far I haven't seen any measures by cities and governments, especially a focus, a target in this specific group. One of the main examples up to now of some actions the governments are taking are basically in São Paulo and also in Rio. They have already announced a big package of funds for credits, for calls, for projects, but they are mostly focused on organizations and small companies. I'm deeply concerned because we don't have the specific data right now that to measure the impact, but it will come. And sometimes I feel like we are waiting for a tsunami to come. And yes, unfortunately, but I really wish I could give some different answer, but I haven't seen any mobilization of this specific sector that is going to be deeply affected.
looking at this from an international perspective, is there something you'd hope, for example, the European arts community to contribute to help deal with the situation? Do you see anything like that Europeans could or should do in this regard?
Well, I have seen because I've been researching what some other countries and regions in the world are doing, and I have seen lots of good projects like emergency funds or some resource hubs in the United States, UK. I think that sharing information now is something really valuable, and I think it won't take long until the cultural community here in Brazil realizes the seriousness of the situation and for the freelancers, and maybe we can get some inspirations and good practices of other projects that are already happening in some other countries.
You mentioned the sharing of knowledge, which probably is a great bridge in a way to a project you did already before the coronavirus was a global topic, because you collected different resources in the field of quality for culture. And I guess, in my view, there's a lot in there that probably gets even more pressing and more important in the current moment. So maybe if you can share a few thoughts about the project originally, and also what you see as a potential of quality for culture dealing with the current situation.
Yes, as you mentioned, I had just released in December 2019 this research project in cooperation with KMM in Hamburg, and also financed and supported by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. So the Quality for Culture is this project that aims to bring quality management as a topic and as a practice for arts organization, and also to show to organizations of all types, all sizes, and in every country that quality management is not something so far from their reality. And in times like this, and even for the challenges that we faced before, arts organizations, they need quality management more than ever. And I think this approach would be really useful in the times to come, because one of the outputs of this project, I have released 2 digital publications, a white paper and a resource guide for arts managers that compiles up to almost 200 online resources on arts management, and presents these resources alongside the 7 quality management principles that are the basis for a quality management approach. And among them, you have topics like so central, like leadership, or like evidence-based decision-making, relationship management. And I think at least these 3 topics are going to be central for the sector to recover and reimagine itself after this crisis.
So that's definitely a recommendation to go online and check this resource guide and the white paper out. We'll put the link of the Quality for Culture platform on the episode notes of this podcast, which leads us already to the end of our interview. And it's definitely would be great to talk to you again in a few weeks' time and see how the situation in Brazil has developed, and also maybe see how this more global conversation hopefully has started, because I don't really see a global conversation happening right now in the arts world about how to deal with the crisis in the future. But as we have to end this for today, I always like to hear personal recommendations. Where do you find inspiration right now? Where do you find resources you like to visit online? Maybe you can share a tip or 2.
Well, I would like to recommend, besides the resource guide of Quality for Culture, which you can download on qualityforculture.org, and has lots of really interesting resources on change management and resilience for arts organizations. I would also like to recommend a website I've discovered a few days ago, the COVID-19 Freelance Artist Resource on WordPress. It was created by a group of freelance artists from US, and they're you can find a lot of resources and some material that can help organizations and also freelancers to face these challenging times.
Beth, thank you very much for your time. As I said, it'd be lovely to talk to you again in a few weeks' time and see how things have hopefully progressed for the better, even though right now it doesn't sound like a situation where we can have easy optimism. Thanks so much to sharing your perspectives, giving us insights into the situation in Brazil, and all the best for you and the whole artistic scene and cultural networks in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Bye.
This was the 10th edition of our podcast, Wie geht's? The Cultural Sphere during the coronavirus crisis. My next guest will be Philipp Dietermeyer, Head of Programs at the European Cultural Foundation in Amsterdam, who will bring a European perspective to our conversation. I'm looking forward to our next editions. Take care. Bis bald. Passen Sie gut auf sich auf.